And now for someone with real talent, take it away, Liz Connors.
Today's opening words are by Robin Kimmerer. We need acts of restoration, not only for our polluted waters and degraded lands, but also for our relationship to the world. We need to restore honor to the way we live. So when we walk through the world, we don't have to avert our eyes with shame, so that we can hold our head up high and receive the respectful acknowledgement of the rest of Earth's beings.
And now I'd like to invite you to rise in body or spirit, however that works for you on Zoom, and join in our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant. Dwell together in peace.
Another.
Por es el espíritu de su iglesia. Servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto. La verdad en el amor los otros.
So be it. and I say good morning, and I can't hear you. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. It's always good to see your faces. It's good to be together, even in this peculiar way. There are new folks among us. I think that Carlisle, our student from the Philippines, is with us. And if there are newcomers that want to stay in touch with First Parish, please go to our webpage and find the contact link and let us know who you are, and that'll be a way to receive our newsletter and stay in touch with stuff that's going on. This is a special service today, and it is one that is sponsored by our Environmental Justice Committee, which is really one of the go-getting committees in this congregation. And this service has been put together by a whole host of people, among them Corinne Dowd and Janet Powers and Renu Bostwick and a whole host of others. We're so happy to welcome Nathan Phillips with us today. Nathan is a climate justice hero. He's a professor at Boston University in the Department of Earth and Environment. And I'm sure you want me to read his 11-page resume, but in fact, I distributed that on our parish biz list yesterday, so you can know a little bit more about Nathan. I also included an article from WBUR about Nathan's most recent 2-week hunger strike in protest of the Weymouth compressor station. Nathan, you and I haven't met, but I heard you on February 19th at the mass rally and protest in Weymouth, and I look forward to seeing you on the barricades in the future. I do want to say something that Janet Powers has written about her association with you, Nathan. Janet is the one who is primarily responsible for having invited Nathan to join us today. And Janet says, the first time I met Nathan was in 2013 when he and his son received the Science Hero Award from Clean Water Action for their work tracking gas leaks that were killing trees. I immediately saw the brilliant, humble, and humane person he has proven to be time and again. Years passed and we crossed paths as fellow pipeline activists. Without really knowing who I was, he jumped to service when he was asked to be the primary presenter at our Bedford's Mothers Out Front Forum on local gas leaks. When I emailed him about this service, his response was similarly swift and gracious. His story is truly special, not just for his sizable contribution to earth science and activism, but for his absolute conviction to his values. By the way, Janet says, my favorite seminar title, Transpiration in Ecohydrology Studies, the Breathing of Watersheds, a super wonky natural scientist with a poetic sensibility. I know you want to hear that title one more time. Transpiration in Ecohydrology Studies, the Breathing of Watersheds. Welcome, Nathan Phillips. A couple of other announcements. Our UU the Vote campaign continues, and I received this from Joe Pompey. He asked that I announce, as a part of our commitment to a national Get Out the Vote campaign, our First Parish UU the Vote group encourages all to view the documentary Rigged, the voter suppression playbook. We cannot stand by and allow what happened as recently as last week in Wisconsin to become the voting norm. A follow-up discussion of the film, along with a strategizing session, will be held via Zoom on Monday evening at 7:00 p.m. This is a prelude to the Tuesday rollout of 2 First Parish Get Out the Vote tools, Postcards to Voters and Vote Forward. Both programs have been credited with increasing voter turnout in targeted 2016 midterm states by as much as 3%. All you need to connect one-to-one to individual voters as a pen, printer, envelopes, and stamps. Please check your email tomorrow for the Monday's Zoom discussion log on information and more specifics about the rollout campaign. One more thing. A couple of weeks ago, I took note that Ann Kiesling, who is married to our parishioner Steve Hagan, and her Bedford Research Foundation have developed one of the COVID-19 testing protocols. And they have been making use of that with area hospitals and extended living facilities. At the direction of Governor Baker, all of those laboratories that are able to do COVID testing have been asked to develop pilot programs for public testing. You know, at present, testing is only available to those that are symptomatic, and the goal of epidemiologists is to get as close to universal testing. Anne has a long history of encouraging testing on AIDS and HIV going back decades. And now, again, she has developed a protocol for public testing. We're still a little tentative in our plans, but it may be that beginning on Tuesday, there will be a tent put up near our Elm Street entrance, and there will be testing available to the general public. She wants to roll this out again as a pilot project in a very small fashion to see what works and what doesn't work. Stay tuned. An email will go out to everybody. Everyone will be asked to pre-register online before being tested. There will be a doctor and an assistant and strict social distancing protocols. People will wait in their cars before being called up to the tent. Probably this will happen between the hours of something like 10 and 2. Again, we're a little tentative and we're still rolling out the plans for this, but an email will go out tomorrow, and we may even have an opportunity to have a Zoom lyceum with Anne as soon as sometime tomorrow. One final announcement, and that is that next week in our service on the 26th, we're going to launch a series that we're calling We Are One Around the World, that will have brief greetings from some of our international friends and partners. And Carlisle from the Philippines has made a video that she will share with us, a brief video, and then that will be followed by other guests from India, from Transylvania, and possibly elsewhere. So exciting things coming up. And once again, it's good to be together. Welcome, everybody.
And now for our time for all ages from the Dorr family.
Hi, we're the Doors. I'm Erin.
I'm T. I'm Graham.
And Mike's filming. We are doing a Time for All Ages called 3 Cheers for the Trees. So beforehand, we did a scavenger hunt. And what sort of things did we find, kids?
We found a banana, a brush, gloves, toilet paper, a bar of soap, cinnamon stick, toothpick, and magazine.
So what do you think all these things have in common?
That they're all used from trees.
They're all derived from trees, right? Even some plastics and gums are used from the insides of the trees, some of the resin, and also things like toilet paper and latex gloves that are very important to us right now, right? So that made us think of all of the different uses that we have for trees, and it also made us think of the book, The Lorax, right? So what was The Lorax about?
It was about a person, well, the one slur,
right? It's a cautionary tale about being greedy about our natural resources, right? So it starts off with a beautiful forest full of what?
Trees.
Trophulus.
But
Truffula trees and the barbalutes and the splashing humming fish. And then what happens? Who shows up?
And then right here, that's the
Onceler.
With the cow.
Exactly. And he comes to town and he does what?
Steals trees.
He chops down the trees to make a thneed. And who shows up to talk with him?
The Lorax.
And he says, I am the Lorax. I speak for the trees. I speak for the trees because the trees have no tongues. But the Onceler thinks that everyone needs a thneed, right? Lots of uses for it. And what happens?
The last dying out, and the last tree fell.
Yeah, he cuts down all the truffula trees. And who does that hurt?
The Lorax. And the people. The fish, the birds, animals.
Yeah, all the animals. So there's a really famous saying that says, the Lorax left a pile of stones that says, unless. And there's a really famous quote that says, now that you're here, the words of the Lorax seem perfectly clear. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. And then what happens?
He gave him a truffula seed.
And
the last one.
The last truffula seed. And what does he tell him to do with it?
Plant it in the middle of town.
Plant it and treat it with care. Give it clean water and feed it fresh air. Grow a forest and protect it from axes that hack. Then the Lorax and all of his friends may come back. So if in the book the Lorax speaks for the trees, who speaks for our trees?
Us and other people and animals.
And it's important, we need the trees, like we need some supplies, right? We need some wood, it helps build our house.
And the earth needs trees.
And the earth needs trees for breathing. And what else? How do our actions speak for the trees?
What does that mean? Not cutting down trees, only cutting down trees. Weak ones.
Being cautious and thoughtful about the trees that we cut down, and maybe using other materials, like more sustainable materials. Like instead of toilet paper, we use bamboo paper.
Wait, that's
or
bamboo paper.
Ceilings, we could put what on our roofs? Metal? Metal instead of...
Metal isn't...
Maybe. So we think that trees are pretty awesome, but we have to be responsible about them, right? And thoughtful.
Because we don't want to kill them.
Right. So let's give 3 cheers for the trees. Ready?
3.
1, 2, 3. We speak for the trees. We speak for the trees. We speak for the trees.
Bye.
This year, some of our community members joined the online UUUNO Spring Seminar Conference. So unfortunately, due to COVID-19, we couldn't travel down to New York City, but the planning committee did an amazing job sorting everything out for us. This conference was about climate change and climate activism, and Jerry, Bob, Nate, Sam, Audrey, and myself all joined the Zoom conference. Audrey and I are here to talk about some of our personal experiences and what we've learned. So take it away, Audrey.
This seminar really impacted how I want to approach tackling the climate crisis. Not only did I learn so much about the different ways climate change affects everyone, but this conference inspired me to work harder towards a sustainable future. Especially now that we're quarantined inside of our houses because of the virus, I felt like I couldn't do anything to help the environment. But after seeing about 100 youth and adults from across the globe come together to talk about this problem, I realized that I'm not alone. It's incredible how even though we all come from different backgrounds, we have one thing that brought us to the seminar, our devotion for creating a better future for the environment. When this many passionate people come together, as cliche as it sounds, we can really make a difference. I also wanted to share one thing that stuck with me at the conference. One of the keynote speakers, Dylan, used an analogy showing why so many adults don't view this as a crisis and why the youth do. It goes, if you put a frog in a pot of water and slowly bring up the temperature. As the pot starts to boil, the frog will just sit in the water until it dies. But if you put a frog in a pot of already boiling water, the frog will immediately jump out. Global warming has been slowly affecting the Earth for decades, so most adults haven't even noticed it. They just think it's normal. But us youths have been thrown into this crisis with no time to get used to it. So we see all the problems and the action that needs to be taken right now. I'll pass it to Olivia now.
Well, something that struck me was that even though we are all experiencing this thing called climate change, it's affecting people around the world in all sorts of ways. Whether it's heavy rain, storms, droughts, it's all under the same name that needs to disappear from our vocabulary. When I look back at what my family and I have done to help the environment, it's nothing compared to what we could be doing and what others are doing. Recycling, environmentally friendly fireplace, and going on protests seem like small things. Sure, it's a start, but like Audrey said, we're trying to get out of the boiling water, not just lie there and let it cook us. We've been told that we are too young to have a clear mind and that we are influenced too easily. And yet we're born into something that has been left for us to fix. We have to protest. We have to do environmentally friendly things. We have to take the action. If we're left with so much responsibility and we are too young, then we need people. We need more help from everyone and anyone.
Overall, this seminar not only taught Olivia and me tons of information, but it also inspired and motivated us to do more. It has left a big impact on us, and we're ready to take more action in this fight for the earth and for the people most affected by it. But this fight isn't only for the youth. We need all the help we can get because we cannot win this alone. Anyone and everyone can do something, no matter how small, like supporting sustainable companies or planting a garden in your backyard. Hopefully, we can get out of this boiling pot of water before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you to our youth presenters, and thank you for joining in our song share.
I guess I am on now. I hope you can all hear me. I'm doing a stewardship moment for today, and here goes. I've always felt like an outsider, but not here at First Parish in Bedford. I was sent away to boarding school in India at age 9 with my American accent and American ways. At age 12, I was brought back to middle school in white suburban Michigan with my Indian accent and Indian ways. Because of the years I spent separated from my family, even with them, I don't feel that I fully belong. As a woman engineer, I never do quite fit into the old boys club of my colleagues. It wasn't until I came to First Parish, though, that I knew what a true welcome felt like. A welcome for the stranger, for anyone, no matter who, rejoicing in differences, freeing people to step up and use all their abilities for the good of the community and for the world. Being an outsider all my life has given me the freedom to think my own thoughts, to never expect to be like anyone else around me, to see things with an outsider's perspective and wonder why we all do things the way that we do. But it wasn't until I experienced being here, so enveloped in acceptance, that I was freed to act on what I think is true and right. As I saw the world accelerating climate change instead of mitigating it, as I learned from inspiring leaders like Janet Powers and Brown Pulliam, this community that gave me that feeling of acceptance I never felt anywhere else also gave me the wings to take action and not keep my outsider's perspective hidden away. I feel deeply for those who are on the outside. And now, as I see how pandemics, climate change-related extreme weather events, and resource shortages harm those on the poorer side of the border, those without healthcare, those without the privilege of being the chosen people, I am ever more grateful for this beloved community of First Parish, who welcomes all, accepts all, values all abilities, and frees us all to do the heroic acts necessary now for the years ahead. So this year, within the next 2 weeks by May 2nd, I hope you will choose to pledge as generously as you are able to support the heroics and the community of this church. Yes, it's almost as if our lives are hanging in the balance. Now in our service, it's time for our offering, and it's not a virtual offering. On your desktop or tablet, you can donate through the blue Give Plus button on our church website, uubedford.org. On your smartphone, you can text a dollar amount to 1-833-765-0091. You'll need to enter a credit card information the first time you do this, and the recommended minimum is $5. Or you can use the good old postal mail. And now I pass it on to, let me see.
Steve Sussman for some music.
I want to thank you all first for inviting me to join you today, and to Janet Powers, Corrine Dowd, Renu Bostwick, and Pastors Gibbons and Gonzalez Milliken for asking me, a scientist, to share my first ever sermon, and on the Sunday of the 50th Earth Week at that. So this is a very special moment for me, and I'm grateful to share it with you. I also want to take a moment to recognize the grief we're all feeling as we're in the midst of the peak of this pandemic, including the losses of elder veterans at the VA hospital right there in Bedford. And to spend a moment also affirming the previous comments of those who can't be with us today because they or a loved one are in peril or on the front lines responding to this crisis in emergency departments or in our grocery stores. And so let's keep them in our thoughts and our hearts as well. I've joined many of you here and at Town Hall in Bedford a couple times over the past few years. Back in October of 2016, Janet and the amazing mothers out front, Renu, invited me to Town Hall to share our research on gas leaks from the pipelines running under our streets and sidewalks, including in Bedford. Then, in April 2018, I saw the most amazing service at the First Parish by Reverend Billy Talon and the Stop Shopping Choir. I never knew worship could be such a glorious experience. Amongst all of this, I've been reading about a radical project at the First Parish that asserts that solar panels are an expression of religious freedom. And do I have it right that you're about at the 1 year's anniversary of installing this project? If so, congratulations. So I want to reflect today on reconciling a dichotomy between faith and science, and on the role of scientists, faith leaders, and people of all kinds working for justice, which requires us to rethink the language, the very language and the traditional boundaries and societal roles that we occupy. Faith and science seem to be inextricably at odds. Faith is about believing what you cannot see, while science is grounded in evidence. I've struggled with the dichotomy between faith and science from a young age. I was raised in a millennialist Christian household, which, although giving me an abundance of love and care, was one where doctrine and literal interpretation of the Bible were not to be questioned. This spiritually stifling experience drove me to science, which represented a freedom to question everything and anything. Sorry about that background noise. So I majored in physics at the California State University in Sacramento, then ecology in graduate school at Duke University, followed by a postdoc in forest science at Oregon State University, and then finally a position at Boston University in the Earth and Environment Department, where I've been since 2000. Along this journey, I've come to see the limitations of dichotomies like that of faith versus science, and the either-or language we sometimes use to describe faith and science as we confront our biggest challenges like climate change or coronavirus for that matter. And I've been liberated not just in my thinking, but in my acting on climate, beyond that of a traditional publishing scientist, through inspiring examples from people of faith and social justice, including some in this very congregation and in this very Zoom chat. Okay, so to rewind my story just a little bit, after being in science for a few years, it began to dawn on me that the scientific enterprise embedded within academia is also a very human institution, warts and all, bound by entrenched social traditions, strictly guarded intellectual boundaries, and hierarchies that can protect power, sometimes even over the best of ideas. I still see science as a powerful way of understanding and navigating our world, but I'm under no illusion that the practice of science is not a very human endeavor and construct. And yet, understanding that limitation of the humanity inextricably embedded in science may prove to be among the most powerful insights about science and its role in addressing both coronavirus and our climate crisis. Meanwhile, as this realization had been dawning on me for years. My students at BU were confronting me with a term I had never heard before, climate justice. I had heard climate change and climate action, and to me, these were about science, technology, policy, and engineering. But climate justice, I had no idea what this meant. Graduate student Ben Thompson informed me that it was the injustice of those least responsible for rising seas, deadly heat waves, droughts, and famines being the most impacted by our fossil fuel economy and consumption. So justice had entered my vernacular as a scientist back around 2010 or 11, and justice became the vehicle for my reconciliation with science and faith. I began to question the very words I used and still use today as a scientist, which can and do share broader and deeper meanings than the mathematical or the technical alone. Value, equality, power, evidence, bias, and conscience, which breaks into con-science. Science is at the very heart of this. These words are prominent in the 7 UU principles. I've come to see these terms not as having double meanings, but having mutually enforcing meanings. And then my students raised the stakes. They backed their demand for climate justice by literally putting their bodies on the line. On January 7th, 2013, 8 college students from Tufts, Brandeis, Harvard, and BU were arrested at the TransCanada office in Westboro, Massachusetts, locking themselves down to protest the Keystone XL pipeline. Now, let me pause here for a moment on sharing this personal journey to reflect back on the overall theme about reconciling the dichotomy of science and faith through justice, because dichotomies have broader implications than for the conversations we have in faith communities or in our science labs. They pervade so much of our popular consciousness. A few examples. Writer Jonathan Franzen wrote a New Yorker article a few years ago called Carbon Capture that asserted that we can either save biodiversity or the climate. As a scientist, I know that work on one benefits the other. We can do both and, not just either or. We hear that climate change is a problem of fossil fuel supply or demand, that acting on climate is better done by making individual lifestyle changes versus working towards so-called system level changes. When the simple act of voting itself and wearing the I voted sticker is the clearest of demonstrations of doing both simultaneously. Even the science community sometimes gets bogged down in dichotomies. Political scientist Donald Stokes wrote a book a couple decades ago called Pasteur's Quadrant that challenged the dominant paradigm that still exists in US science, that the research enterprise is a zero-sum game between basic versus applied science. The more we spend on one, the less we must spend on the other, according to this frame. Yet Louis Pasteur was not caught up in this dichotomy. He developed the germ theory of disease, a foundation to this day of science, by figuring out how to bake bread and brew beer better. Even the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the National Climate Assessment, and many city climate action plans, including Boston's, frame climate action as 2 separate things: mitigation, or reducing the causes of climate change, and adaptation, or responding to and preparing for the impacts. But the solar panels on the First Parish and on the Bethel AME Church in Jamaica Plain defy these binaries. They give the concept of sanctuary and resilience a whole new meaning, demonstrating that mitigating climate damage can simultaneously provide adaptation in the form of community resilience to energy and climate shocks that could interrupt the electric grid. As we speak today, in response to the threat of the coronavirus, 100 electric workers are sequestered in National Grid's Electric Transmission Control Center in Massachusetts as a measure to safeguard the human expertise needed to reliably operate our electric grid. We are vulnerable. My point is, instead of viewing achieving climate justice as a contest between this or that approach, between the power of faith or that of science, between equity and economics as a zero-sum game. We must see it as a both-and proposition. And this is exactly what I think of when I think of a Green New Deal. And as bleak as it seems at times, including right now, we are seeing a shift in our thinking and our doing. As recently as a year ago, a still dominant narrative was that we can either have affordable energy or clean energy. Now, builders are realizing that net zero energy housing is more affordable than fossil fuel heated buildings. And Brookline has passed the first ban on new fossil fuel buildings east of California. What we thought was out of the mainstream has shifted to the possible and even the realized. Now, let me come back to the intertwining of my personal story with our collective story before I finish up. So those college students back in 2013 locking down in Westboro was something I could not look away from. And those same college students stepped up yet again as a high-pressure gas pipeline was unjustly being forced into the community of West Roxbury, Boston, starting around 2014. In the spring of 2016, while the fight for climate justice in West Roxbury was peaking in intensity, the Bedford First Parish was stepping up to radically challenge an assumed dichotomy that solar panels can be a tool but not a symbol. You viewed solar panels as both a way to act on climate and as an expression of religious values, freedom, and resolve. Meanwhile, Reverend Gibbons was blocking construction work along with 15 other faith leaders in West Roxbury, being arrested for conscience, for values, for equity, and for justice. Watching Reverend Gibbons and so many others there in May of 2016, faith leaders put their bodies on the line, my understanding of climate justice, introduced to me by my students, was deepening into the realm of faith. 3 theologians who founded the Climate Disobedience Center, Tim DeChristopher, Marla Markham, and Jay O'Hara, helped me to see that my science and my faith need no longer be kept as separate parts of my whole being. And today, these 3 leaders and others are doing the No Coal, No Gas campaign and bringing an end to coal in New England. And that initiative and campaign is happening right now. And so this is what compelled me to join Bedford parishioners Diane Martin and Brown Pulliam, who I see here today, 2 of my biggest climate heroes, and 4 others to descend into the West Roxbury Pipeline Trench on August 18, 2016. We were arrested and spent the next year and a half together mounting a climate necessity defense which was grounded in justice, faith, and science, and was ultimately affirmed by Judge Mary Driscoll on March 27, 2018. From West Roxbury to the Merrimack Valley, to our fight for justice to stop the Weymouth compressor, which included my own 14-day hunger strike, faith leaders like the Reverends Gretchen Elmendorf, Fred Small, Betsy Sowers, and Michelle Walsh there have stepped up and inspired growing ranks from among the community of even scientists to step out of our labs and our offices and embrace our full selves and our fellow residents of planet Earth in the challenge of our lives. We are more than knowledge generators as scientists. We are parents, we are siblings, caregivers, believers, even atheists who are believers in their own way. And in this perilous time, the scientific community is changing, and change is being demanded and driven from the voices of those who have traditionally been kept out. In the words of Dr. Sarah Meyer, a climate scientist who is redefining what it means to be a scientist and a human in a time of coronavirus and climate crisis, quote, "Like many public moments of leadership and crises, this moment requires both evidence-based leadership and an intersectional, justice-focused lens on decision-making, moral and social attention, and the actual physical investment of resources and safety." Let me tell you that words like that of Dr. Meyer are still considered radical and even dangerous. Why? They strike at the very heart of keeping scientists cloistered safely in our place as one separate constituent in our grand planetary challenge. Yet the fossil fuel industry and unrestrained capitalism aren't playing by these same rules. They find synergy wherever they can. The centralized power concentrating systems that that drive climate chaos simultaneously make us more dependent and thus vulnerable to those impacts. Worse, they then literally profit off the death and misery they create. Witness the profiteering off medical masks and filling up of our strategic oil reserve, even as oil demand plummets. We can and must flip the script and use the power of our own synergies across faith, science, race, age, ability, gender, and sexuality. Words like science and faith that once limited me to a binary either or have come to liberate me. And I hope that they liberate you too. Now let's get to work. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that message. And now for a rousing closing song before we have our closing words.
We need to wake up. We need to wise up. We need to open our eyes and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future. And we need to start right now.
I'm going to talk about no more Mother Earth. We support the Green New Deal. We know that climate change is real. Glaciers, coastlines, pollution-free air are leaving along with the polar bear. Ocean voyages or auto vacations, we'll have to put these things on rations. Using oil and gas and coal will make it hard to reach our goal. The small blue ball, as seen through space, is still our favorite living place. Let's gird our loins, pull up our pants. There won't be any second chance.
Thank you, Steve. So at this time, we want to have a moment to do some question and answer with our special guest. This is a post-service discussion, and we're thrilled to have Nathan with us. And so what I'm going to do is moderate our question and answer post-service discussion. You can submit your questions on the chat box on Zoom, or you can text me on my regular cell phone if that's easier for you at 309-310-2341. And we invite your questions and insights to come in through the chat for our discussion with Nathan. Have our shout outs still going, which is wonderful. This was a real team effort and a dream team at that.
How about if I ask a question?
I would love that. Go for it. You are very welcome.
How's the solar project at the First Parish and the larger effort to ultimately go to net zero carbon?
That's a great question. And I will turn that one over to John Gibbons, I think, unless we've got Carl Winkler on today, but I'll let John take that one.
It was a great saga, Nathan. You know, we were 3 years in litigation, and it was spring a year ago that we dedicated our solar panels, and one of our youth climbed out a steeple window and with a super soaker managed to baptize the solar panels. Our attorneys were present, and they had been just wonderful throughout. We still do have a longer range plan, and as Annie said, our parishioner Carl Winkler has been the mad genius that has advanced this from the beginning, along with a whole eco-conservancy task force. We still have notions of going to geothermal and looking into that. That gives me yet another opportunity to promote our stewardship campaign, because that's one of those things that, you know, money will solve. But we haven't given up on it, and we see it as an outside project that we're trying to live our values on the front lines, as you have been doing in Weymouth, and others have been doing it West Roxbury and other places. And we want to continue that and step up our activities there, but we also want to live it as much as we can within our own meeting house and in our own community. And of course, Mothers Out Front has been in leadership in our community around gas leaks and other issues. That's what I know.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. So we have a lot of good questions coming in. So one I want to touch on first, it's coming from both Deb Weiner and Bob Dorer about this current moment and how that intersects with our work for climate justice. Deb asks what you make of reports of animals returning to spaces that have not been seen in years in this time of reduced activity due to COVID-19. And Bob Dorer asks, does the current situation offer any lessons in terms of how to make the extreme environmental impacts of runaway climate change real to people? So if you just want to comment a bit on our current situation and how that interacts with our climate justice work, that would be great to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I see it just anecdotally, I feel like I can hear the birds more, and I've seen turkeys in more places than I have before. I live right next to the Massachusetts Turnpike, and yesterday, for the first time ever, I saw a great blue heron flying over the Massachusetts Turnpike from one side of the Charles River to the other. So I think we are seeing, and the science is showing us from space, that the air pollution has drastically gone lower because we're not in our cars anymore. And I do think that although this is not the way we should or want to think about, addressing climate, we are seeing opportunities present themselves to ourselves that I think we need to be thinking very, very carefully about. Where decisions are being made in one way or the other, and I think we need to really seize opportunities that are presenting themselves, whether it be the streets and how we allocate space to cars versus people, and other things like that that we can learn from and move forward on. I think it's also, it does often become this dichotomy where it's like, well, we have to deal with this emergency situation first, and then we can talk about the long term later, as if they're two different things. But in fact, the resilience that we build for disaster preparedness ends up helping us deal with these kinds of the long range as well.
Thank you. We also have a couple questions about kind of updates. One person, let me see if I can find it, asked about climate efforts in the State House. This was from Rich and Joan. And then there was also a question about no coal, no gas, especially in Bow, New Hampshire. I don't know if you're familiar with that particular campaign, but would love to hear more about those updates.
Yeah, so, there's so much legislation going on in the State House that I feel, not as in the loop as I could on where everything is. But one thing I'm really excited about is one of our biggest challenges, which is cleaning up the building sector, especially the heating sector. And so we're seeing action at municipal levels, like I mentioned in Brookline with these gas bans, that it's going, viral in its own way. So Cambridge is looking at this, Newton is looking at this, other municipalities are really starting to move in that direction. So that's state level, city level policy, but it's happening all over the state, the Commonwealth. And I'm also very, very enthusiastic about a bill called the Future Act, and its provision that allows for utilities to start transitioning off of gas altogether and into clean electrification of the building heating sector at scale in a really equitable, affordable fashion, using the heat that's in the earth or in the air and harvesting that heat so it's inherently localized. So those are really exciting things there. As far as the No Coal, No Gas campaign goes, I actually was part of that and was arrested 2 times in the last 5 months or 6 months to stop those coal trains, which they just make no sense in terms of why we are still on coal in Massachusetts, in the New England grid. And we've got the wind at our back, literally, in terms of bringing coal to an end. And I encourage everyone to go to the Climate Disobedience Center, which is one of the groups that is really, really working hard on this to stop the coal trains from running.
Thank you so much. There's also another shout out in the chat about a bill H471 in the Massachusetts legislature right now. This protects science education, including climate change education in our public schools. Thank you to Abby Hafer for that, throwing that into our knowledge. There were a couple questions about sort of science and industry and the ways that kind of knowing and objectivity are framed with those groups. Dorothy Africa asks to expand about the ways scientists and academics have been encouraged to be quiet in the name of objectivity, whereas industry is not under this stricture. And then another question, let me see if I can find it again, about patriarchy in science, which I thought was very interesting. If you could comment on the role of big business and the scientific patriarchy as agents of change or obstructionists. So those are both about business and science, if you have comments there.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a lot of research coming out about this as well, about how science is done. And workers like Naomi Oreskes at Harvard and Jeffrey Supran and Ben Franta have been looking at essentially how academic science is being kind of bought out and what that means about limitations of speech. I've seen it in my own department at Boston University, that grant money comes, even if not explicitly, often implicitly with strings attached. And that's something that, I think, ironically, the folks who are willing to speak out most about that, I think, are the early career scientists who have the most to lose. I think that senior level scientists who are in safe positions like myself, who have tenure, we really need to be leading the charge in terms of calling out the conflicts of interest that are, having that impact on science and getting the actual facts out there. Science is and academics are second only to the military in incidents of sexual harassment and abuse. And I know why. It's because we are operating in a highly hierarchical system of power imbalances. And to me, the patriarchy is a real problem within the scientific enterprise, and that's something we really need to reform and address. Again, I think that the calls for reform are coming, and the demands are coming from below, from the early career scientists, from graduate students, and using platforms like social media, like Twitter, for example, which I've seen a graduate student in Arizona can call out bad behavior of a senior professor in Massachusetts. And there's at least the possibility in all of the possible bad stuff and the trolling, there is the possibility of flattening of this extreme hierarchy. So there are some directions that we can be working on for reform.
Thank you. And I see we have Chris Gibbons chiming in that he agrees with those points and in the pressures that are on scientists right now. So there were a couple questions about kind of how we frame things and reach people. There was a question on how do we reach sort of an average person to understand these issues. And then there was a suggestion, I think, from Delcy Sherrill around kind of how do we make visible things like carbon dioxide and methane, things that are invisible actually to the eye. And then we had a chiming in about a model that was developed in 2003, I think, to help people visualize natural gas leaks. Very cool. That's from Chris Gibbons. But I am curious if you have thoughts on how we sort of make these invisible forces and invisible changes more visible to your average American citizen.
Yeah, and so there's those go together as questions, and I look to Mothers Out Front who have exemplified bringing that all together, because they helped make the invisible visible by using their senses, whether that's their nose or their eyes, or published data on where gas leaks are, to actually put signs on trees and say, here is a gas leak, and to make that invisible visible. I've learned that in my own research. We did the first study of its kind in 2013 that showed there was over 3,000 of these gas leaks in the city of Boston. And I realized that actually this had been known about for decades. It's just that you and I and average everyday people had no idea. Myself, I had no idea until it could be visualized so everyone could see it. Because before that, it was just scattered anecdotes all over the city. But when you visualize it all together on a map, everyone sees simultaneously the scope and scale of the problem. And, you know, just in terms of reaching those everyday people, one thing I've learned from West Roxbury to East Boston, to Weymouth and the Fore River Basin, is that the local advocates who are in the trenches literally fighting back against these injustices, they actually know the most about the issues that are happening there. And so scientists and others who go to render help need to listen and learn from those communities before weighing in on anything. And because first of all, you're going to be more helpful if you listen first. And second of all, you're not going to embarrass yourself by saying things that you have no idea what you're talking about. I've learned that a couple of times. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. We'll just do a couple more here. There was a couple questions about sort of the political framing and political side of these things. One going back into history and one about the present day. So I'll name both of those. Irene Gravina was offering some connection to the April 19th holiday. Is this Patriots Day? Forgive me, I'm not a New Englander, y'all. I'm from Illinois. I don't know a lot about this whole business, but
it is Patriots Day.
Okay,
Yes.
Great. Patriots Day. And Irene suggesting, you know, the British Crown was using colonies to bolster the East India Tea Company, promoting corporate interests over people, including the participation in the slave trade. And how can we sort of use people's historical, you know, ties to that sense of patriotism rooted in these stories to motivate them to fight these same corporate interests today? I think it's a good point, even though obviously I'm not your target demographic there. And then there was another question about, you know, again, going to the pandemic and the whether that is going to make things easier or harder in the fight for climate justice. A suggestion it may catalyze people to move toward a general strike. Another suggestion that given that the stimulus bill is not environmentally friendly, that has already been passed, you know, what impact will this have? So I don't know if you want to comment at all on our history and political present in those senses.
Yeah, well, I think that meeting people where they are is really important. And, you know, some people, a message of energy independence and clean energy resonates with them, and others, you know, climate is the challenge that they want to hear about. And so there's many ways to engage people from all kinds of different, you know, perspectives and political backgrounds on the issue. I heard it probably best by Bill McKibben recently in a conversation with City Councilor Michelle Wu in Boston. And he grew up in Lexington, a very also historic, in terms of US history, place. And he said, I grew up not really understanding that there was an inconsistency between dissent and patriotism. And so I think there are a lot of things that we can take and apply from, you know, the history of the colonial revolutionary history in the United States, even though we're recognizing so much of the things that were not good about that time and were unjust. I didn't quite gather the other question. It was about the pandemic, but maybe if you could recap that.
Sure. Yes, it was a lot. Basically, you know, one person had commented in, oh, do you think that this situation that we're in right now might allow for something like a general strike? Because we're experiencing this disruption, and obviously it's making us aware of what we can do if we need to. On the other hand, another person was asking, let me see if I can find it, because they had some good specifics about basically, you know, seeing that the stimulus bill has already been, you know, rewarding corporations in not, you know, including anything environmentally friendly. Should we be concerned that this will only create a worse situation in terms of fighting for climate justice?
Yeah, and I think that's, a huge concern. We have to push back right now because Naomi Klein calls it disaster capitalism, which is profiting off of the destruction that corporate entities are wreaking on the people. So it's like it's triple damage because, again, extractive economies are damaging our climate. They're simultaneously making us vulnerable to the impacts of that chaos, and they then profit off of the damages that are happening. So we really, really need to flip that script, and allowing ourselves to be divided and conquered is not the way to do it. We need to unite. We need to demand that our economy is one that works for us, that's circular, that's people-centered and nature-centered rather than profit-centered. And there are ways to pivot from that. I was disappointed in my town of Newton that even a seemingly progressive place like that, the reactions to coronavirus, a couple of them right off the bat were to relax the ban on styrofoam containers for takeout. And I mean, maybe that was justified for the short term, but I don't think a needs assessment was even done. And so we have to watch out for reactions that we have versus commitments to use this time to move forward instead of backwards. I mean, we really have two directions to go, forwards or backwards. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. And I want to just note that many people have been chiming in the chat, agreeing, appreciating what you said about patriarchy and hierarchy in sciences, and some concerns that's keeping us in the status quo, and some agreements there. So just shouting that out. As we wrap up, the last thing I want to ask, a couple people asked sort of questions of this nature, is basically what everybody always wants to know. So what should we do? Like, very specifically, what can regular everyday people who are, quarantined for the moment, in our homes, what can we do at this time to help us move forward, as you say, instead of backwards in this really key turning point we're in?
Well, I also, the wisdom of others, I'm going to second, including Reverend Mariama White Hammond, who was on a Zoom just about a week ago, and really, made the point that, we don't have much, if anything, to rely on from the federal government. And really, we need to be looking at the actions that we can make in our state and in our local governments. And I think those are huge, huge opportunities. And you're showing it at the First Parish by moving ahead on solar, moving ahead on geothermal, and keeping those, goals alive and well. When I think about even just how things have changed in the last year and a half, the Green New Deal has been envisioned as a large federal program, and we're going to keep fighting for a Green New Deal. But we can also envision, what does a Green New Deal look like in Bedford? How can we help to localize our economic resilience and community? And so, I've been just amazed at how, in spite of all of the problems that we have, whether it's the West Roxbury lateral pipeline, the Weymouth compressor station, or coronavirus, that these very, very difficult times end up creating social fabric and cohesion, including my dear friends Brown and Diane Martin, and Pat Martin, who I didn't know was even on this call from New Hampshire. And so just, we're stronger, and we need to maintain our social cohesion, our care for each other, and focus on solutions that are in front of us.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate all your time you took with us today and all your wisdom and responding to all our questions. I do encourage folks, if you're interested, to keep scrolling through the chat. There's some great suggestions, points of information, and things to consider that people have been sharing there about equity and racism and patriarchy and solutions that will help folks get jobs who are losing jobs in some sectors. Just a lot of good stuff in the chat. So thank you all so much for everyone who planned the service. I know a ton of work went into that. I'm really grateful and really grateful again for you, Nathan, for being with us this morning.
And if you can share the chat, I'd love to be able to answer some of the questions in more depth if I can.
We will capture that.
Okay.
And and also just to let people know that the service has been recorded, and there should be a recording available, you know, later this week, with great thanks to our tech volunteers.
Yes, indeed. Yes, and we'll definitely make sure we save that chat. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. For folks who might be interested in staying around to chat more, you are welcome to do so and have our sort of community hour.